Hello, thanks for joining us. My name is Heidi Stevens. I'm a columnist for the Chicago Tribune, where I've worked for 23 years and a proud member of the Chicago Tribune Guild. Thank you for coming to tonight's Chicago Community Forum. We are here to discuss a topic that's near and dear to my heart, the Chicago Tribune specifically, but more broadly, local news coverage in Chicago and in the Midwest, and your access to it. As we speak tonight, vultures are circling, hoping to strip local journalism to the bone. All of our newspapers owned by Tribune Publishing are at great risk. A predatory hedge fund, Alden Global Capital, is working to take over our company. And if Alden is able to buy out Tribune Publishing, the Chicago Tribune and its suburban papers will cease to exist as they do today. Alden doesn't care about journalism. Alden doesn't care about our communities. What Alden cares about is profit. That's it. In the 17 months since Alden Global Capital became the top shareholder of Tribune Publishing, our papers have suffered. Our staffs have shrunk. Our ability to cover our communities has been scaled back dramatically during a global pandemic and a historic movement for social justice and a pivotal presidential election and all of the other big and small things that take place in our towns and cities every day. Exactly when we need to be improving and expanding what we cover. All the while, Tribune, guided by Alden, raked in millions in profit. We've been working for months to raise awareness about Alden, connect with our community allies, and find investors committed to a sustainable, community-based, civic-minded, nonprofit model for our papers. Our goal is to have the level of staffing required to expand coverage of our communities in a way that those communities deserve, led by a diverse staff who's treated with respect and dignity. We want our unions to be partners and allies to the community. We must begin a dialogue from a shared position as Chicagoans, workers, and neighbors. So, faced with a decision, accept a future planned in distant boardrooms or stand up and fight, we are choosing to stand up and fight. Thank you for joining us. On May 26th, we'll host our first community coalition meeting, reaching out to other membership-driven groups to talk about how to support each other's struggles through organizing. We built a union because we want to be able to consistently do better journalism no matter what happens. Tonight, we're going to hear from readers and allies about why our papers need to be saved. Speakers who can attest to the destruction that Alden has already caused, but also share a growing ray of hope. We're going to share ways we can work together and build together for a better future for our communities through strong local news, which provides us with the information we need to live and learn and work and play in our communities. Your participation is essential to saving local news. I hope you'll ask questions. We would like for you to use the Q&A tool that's at the bottom of your screen. I'll be passing those questions along to our panelists so they can answer them during the session. And now I'm going to turn this over to Wendy Fox-Weber, Suburban Chicago Tribune Guild Unit Co-Chair and Suburban Entertainment Editor, who will introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Heidi. Our first speaker is Reverend Emma Lozano, founder and president of Pueblo Sin Fronteras Familia Latina Unida.
Well, we live in a time where people with money, they can perpetuate lies and get that message out to our communities, and they appear as their legitimate, credible, factual news, and their sources are totally fabrication. For example, Trump won the election. The COVID-19 is under control and will disappear. The vaccine will make you sterile. Our communities are hit with this tidal wave of disinformation based on no actual facts. Another example closer to home to me is when Fox, Glenn Beck, and other right-wing news sources without any evidence said that Emma Lozano got millions of dollars from George Soros and was personally responsible for the migrant caravans to the US border. That put us in danger and at risk and put my address out there of the church in my home. And white supremacists attacked our church, and Trump supporters in MAGA gear came to my house with a film crew to confront me. What we have here, or what we had here in Chicago, took years for us to build. We were able to, put together responsible journalists and reporting that really touched on all the issues of our community, and the Black and Brown community, especially I have to speak about the Latino community. And I felt like we were part of that we educated each other, and all of these reporters covered the massive voters registration campaign in 1982, the mass marches of 2006. Elvira in Sanctuary was covered by Hoy and the Tribune on the front page. These are Chicago stories that had a national effect on our communities. Elvira Arellano, a single undocumented mother who took Sanctuary, became the face of the undocumented, a worker, a mom of a mixed status family. That's a story of one woman in Sanctuary on Paseo Boricua, and a little church in Chicago started the Sanctuary movement. Cities, universities, even states are now sanctuaries. The Chicago Tribune photographer Abel Uribe and Don Terry, reporter, did a magazine for the Sunday Tribune on this struggle in particular. Followed Elvira's story from the beginning all the way to her deportation to Mexico. This put a realistic historical life for everyone to see. Now, how and why terminate Hoy newspaper, which was like a testament in Chicago, that Chicago was a bilingual city and that, Latino issues, struggles, and events were worthy of being covered. And if we're a bilingual city, it showed that we were acting like that. We're living in this massive, well-funded disinformation campaign that's dismantling the factual news and journalists that we have relationships with for years and need in our community. We have a moral responsibility now, and I feel, really that this is important for the Latino community to understand. We have to fight back. We can't allow this to happen. And we should do everything in our power and look at how other cities have dealt with this issue and really come up with a way that we can actually protect the journalists, the reporters, and the history that we've made together in this city to fight back.
Now I'm going to turn it over to Jim Friedlich from Lenfest Institute, working throughout local news ecosystems in Philadelphia and beyond to crack the code on a sustainable future for this vital resource. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Heidi, for that lovely introduction. And thank you, Emma, for your very moving words. Emma referred to what is happening in other cities, and that's why I'm here. I'm here with a vision of an alternative future for local news and an alternative future for a great newspaper and great local news serving a great city. I'd like to just take a few minutes to talk about what's happened in Philadelphia and some of the lessons, the to-dos and not to-dos, and then respond to questions and join my other panelists. First, the Philadelphia story, to coin a phrase. Philadelphia's newspapers, the Philadelphia Daily News, the Philadelphia Inquirer, were also owned by Alden Capital and another similar investment firm called Angelo Gordon. And the local good and great of Philadelphia really stood up and said, no mas. We think our newspapers and our civic treasures belong to our city. A great city like Philadelphia, a great city like Chicago deserves a great newspaper. So a collection of local business people and philanthropists across the political spectrum mainly progressive, stood up and purchased the Philadelphia Inquirer in 2014. They took it a step further. The lead investor, Jerry Lenfest, took full control of the paper and decided to donate it, in effect, to the city of Philadelphia. He donated it to a nonprofit. So our model is nonprofit, local control of a great American newspaper. And what that has accomplished is that there have been funds and support. We still face the challenges of running a newspaper, but we're able to maintain a very sizable and important newsroom, 200 plus. We've had superb investigative news coverage. We've had broad and equitable coverage of a very diverse city. And during COVID, the news content and the digital news production in particular has been absolutely superb. I've really derived 3 lessons from this. The first, as Hillary said, is that it takes a village to support and revitalize and rebuild local news. We have had superb support from local foundations, from local philanthropists, but also from thousands and thousands of local donors. The newspaper is now run as a nonprofit, not unlike WBEZ, not unlike an NPR station. Jerry liked to say, if you support the art museum, the orchestra, the opera, children's hospital, or your university, why not the local newspaper? The second is that it really is an ecosystem of news that needs to be supported, not one heritage newspaper, even a super important one like the Philadelphia Inquirer or the Chicago Tribune. Surrounding those newspapers and serving multiple diverse communities are Black-owned newspapers, Latinx-owned and Spanish language news services like the ones that Emma referred to, television, public radio, et cetera. So we have taken a holistic ecosystem approach to the Philadelphia marketplace, and our grant funding and our support has been across the market, trying to serve the market as a whole. The third lesson, like any movement, whether a labor movement or a political or social movement, in this case, a movement for media, is that it takes leadership. And it's not only the leadership of a single wealthy individual, even a very selfless one, it's the leadership of civic interests, putting their rivalries aside and supporting a civic treasure called local news. So what we found in Philadelphia was that philanthropists, corporations, foundations, and over 5,000 local donors have supported this institution and this need. There's no doubt that that spirit exists in Chicago. We're seeing it emerge in a big way. I think Lillian will probably speak to this in the city of Baltimore. There is a leader, Stuart Bainham, who has offered to buy the Baltimore Sun and to contributed to a nonprofit. So I hope that that emerges as a solution in the city of Chicago sooner rather than later. And we stand ready to help in any way that we can. As an example, I say that modestly, or as a provider of best practices and a provider of support. And with that, I'm very, very pleased to be here, and I look forward to trying to work with you and help you in any way that I can.
Thank you very much, Jim. Now I'm going to turn it back to Heidi Stevens for questions.
And thank you, Emma, for that beautiful and powerful speech. And thank you, Jim, for helping us expand the way we envision the funding of the journalism that we all rely on every day. So we have a couple of questions here. I'm excited to hear your answers to these. This one is directed to you, Jim, from Bill Bulu. I'm sorry if I'm butchering your last name, Bill. Thank you for asking a question, and feel free to scold me for that pronunciation. In England, tax dollars support journalism, including print journalism. Should the US also dedicate tax dollars to support print journalism, given the realities of advertising increasingly deserting print journalism for online. The English model seems like it could be a solution.
Thank you for the question. It's a wonderful question. I'm of the view that government should play a larger role in the support of local news. I think it's important exactly what role it plays and how it plays it. I think we should all be concerned and a little suspicious of direct government control and investment in the news content itself. We should look to models like NPR, which operates independently of the government, although it is funded by tax dollars. The Voice of America is defined and legislated as an independent entity, and yet it still was attacked by the Trump administration for its news coverage, its approach to China and other markets. So I think we need to be careful, but there are a number of policies and regulatory approaches that are bubbling up right now. One is that the government, local governments and city governments and the national government spend a lot of money on advertising, legal notice advertising, census advertising, health information advertising, advertising for the military. They can decide, and we think should, to devote many of those dollars to local news. There's a proposal underway now about using tax credits in the same way as you incentivize the purchase of solar collectors or wind turbines. Why not offer a tax credit, not a tax deduction, but a straight up tax credit for your subscription or your donation to local news? So there's a number of mechanisms where the power of the dollar, the power of regulation can help local news. So a whole nother arena of conversation about the platforms, Google, Facebook, and how they may or may not be regulated best in future. So I think we're in the right territory. What can government do? The direct investment piece, I think, is challenging.
This question is for Emma. Do you think it's reasonable to expect support from underserved minority communities for a newspaper that is perceived as conservative, that in George's words, didn't even have the courage to support Hillary Clinton in 2016? I think George is referring to the editorial board endorsement process when he says support. So newspapers endorse, candidates during the election process, and in 2016, the Tribune editorial board endorsed Gary Johnson instead of Hillary Clinton.
If you really look back, I think sometimes they endorse candidates that we support also as well. So, I think overall you have to look at the overall picture of what we're talking about and what we're trying to protect here and what we're trying to save, I think. And I think it's important for our communities. And in the past, we've been covered in the Tribune, OI newspaper, and our issues have been able to, we've been able to even organize in our communities because of it. Like there'll be disagreements, and I think that sometimes we won't be on the same page all the time, but I think that it's an important newspaper for us and our community to hold on to.
This question is for Lily Reed, who the audience hasn't heard from yet, but you'll hear from her in a few moments. She is from the Baltimore Sun Guild. And Susan Hurley wants to know if unionization has affected diversity in the workplace, in our newsrooms.
The Baltimore Sun Guild is a longtime guild. We've been around for many, many decades. And I believe that our guild, our contract, has in many ways protected young journalists, new journalists who are coming in, who are often much more diverse than the previously overly white newsrooms that we've had. Baltimore's a majority Black city, for example. And we see our union very much as protecting those careers when they're early and folks are still learning the ropes and getting their feet wet. We're very worried that our contracts will not be able to remain as strong if we head into a hedge fund ownership situation. That's a concern for us. And we're also very concerned about the morale of our workplaces. We see that, we can make diverse new hires, have great newsrooms, but if we can't keep those employees, it's going to be detrimental in the long run to the coverage that we have.
Okay, Jim, here's another one that I think will be good for you. Again, from Bill, who says, as print journalists working on a physical paper, how do you make the case that there's a future for physical media? I ask this as one who subscribes to 3 papers, numerous magazines, and also reads online sources. So sort of walk us through the case for continuing a print product.
I think what we need to do, and what newspapers have always needed to do, and media has always needed to do, is follow the consumer. And as long as there are consumers who adore print and are willing to pay for it, as there are, then there should be print newspapers. In the long run, I think what you'll see is more and more emphasis on Sunday newspapers in print and digital activity and digital updates throughout the week. We've seen this in Europe. We've seen this evolving across the United States. The most important aspect of sustaining big American newspapers from a business perspective is the advent of digital subscriptions. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal all have millions of digital subscriptions. Ironically, they benefited from the Trump administration and all of their coverage of Trump. Their readers rallied behind them and subscribed digitally. They've benefited in some ways from COVID, which put a greater emphasis on the digital newspaper than a print alternative. So I think we need to be realistic about the future of print, that there is a strong and inexorable secular shift. There are forces that will not be reversed with respect to digital, and we need to lean into digital and get people to pay for it. But as long as there are people willing to pay for print, we should serve that need.
William McNary, this is a good question for you. Again, the audience hasn't heard from William yet. He's on our list of speakers coming up. He's the co-director of Citizen Action, which is a progressive grassroots organization. And this audience member says, it seems impossible that in a city the size of Chicago, with many wealthy individuals and thriving businesses, that there couldn't be a coalition formed to provide seed money for a nonprofit organization to be formed to buy the Tribune. What are your thoughts on that?
That sounds like a fascinating idea. I think the fact of the matter is that we are making sure by this forum that we find a buyer, hopefully a buyer who is closer to making sure that we have a news source or a newspaper that serves all Illinoisans, and a not-for-profit organization with the right group of people may do that. But I think it's just as important, particularly those here on this call, to understand that the first step is to making sure that we, as people who are concerned about the Tribune and maintaining its diversity and maintaining its transparency and its accountability, making sure that we as a people from all different walks of life. You see on this call, I'm considered an activist, but on this call, we also have journalists. We also have people who are from different walks of life. And that's the key. A little bit less Descartes and a little bit more Harriet Tubman. In other words, a little bit less I think, therefore I am, and a little bit more let's walk together, children, and stay together. And as you hear in my talk, I want to just talk about the fact that the first step to getting any buyer is to make sure that we all have a common purpose together, that we stand for the same thing, and that we stand strong and we stand bold together. And so I love the idea of having a nonprofit that shares our views and our values taking over the Tribune. That's one good step of having these kind of forums, is we get good ideas from people like you, some of them that we may not have thought of ourselves.
William, if I could just stay with you for another minute.
Sure.
What do you view the role of, in your role as an activist, how do you view the role of a free press, of a community newspaper, whether it's a small local paper or a large national paper? What do you view the role of the press in keeping a community vibrant and healthy from your standpoint as an activist?
I'm going to answer your question by doing my remarks right now, if that's okay. So let me thank you for the question, and let everybody know again, I am William McNary, and I'm the director of a statewide coalition called Citizen Action. It's a coalition of community groups and civic groups and labor organizations and other assorted activists and advocates. And what we do is we build progressive power by organizing on issues, progressive political issues that benefit everyday people. And we also hold elected officials accountable. At Citizen Action, we say there are three kinds of people. There are people that make things happen. There are people that watch things happen. And then there are people that don't know what's happening. And I can't think of any place else in the world I would rather be on a Wednesday night than right here with these brothers and sisters, these informed, valuable brothers and sisters. People who are not just content to watch things happen, but people who are active participants in the movement for social justice and social change. I truly believe, because we all are gathered here this evening, that our press will be freer and that we will hold our elected officials more accountable because of the work that the presenters and others have done. With that disclaimer, let me be real quick on my remarks. My first job, by the way, when I was in high school, I went to Hyde Park High School in Chicago. We called him a paper boy. I was a newspaper deliverer. And every day after school, I would go into this Hyde Park warehouse and we would roll up our newspapers with rubber bands and load up our carts and get our tags full of addresses. And then we would rush out. I would deliver every day. I would deliver Chicago Tribune, the Chicago Sun-Times, the Chicago Daily News, and to two people in the Hotel Del Prado, 2 New York Times. Anyway, I took much pride in my work. And in addition to being one of the top newspaper deliverers in the city, I won a TV for my work. But more importantly, it provided me with a weekly salary, which fed my hunger for soul music when I visited the local record store on 47th and now King Drive, then known as South Parkway, where I basically developed my questions, my record collection. So although I would argue that my role in getting the truth out to readers was invaluable, let me just say the fact that the newspaper's highest value is not in its deliverers, it is not in its distribution centers, it's not in its printing presses, it's not in its real estate, it's not in its technology, it's valuable, it's not even with its reporters. Let me be clear, a newspaper's greatest value is the sacred public trust that the press holds and its values to the readers as a pillar of democracy. And you can't put a price on that. In a democracy, journalism is not just a private business, but a public service. And in order for people to make informed public policy decisions or informed electoral choices, we need information and not just opinions. And because there are many sources of information that purport to be news outlets, we need to be ready when they come at us with dishonesties and deceits and falsehoods and fabrications and mendacities and smears and slanders and conspiracy theories and alternative facts and half-truth and whole lies. Having a local newspaper like the Tribune is particularly important where we have access to the basic agreed upon facts, even those facts that might make us uncomfortable. So I think this is beginning to answer your question. A newspaper that covers all of Chicago's metropolitan area, especially those that are generally underserved and disadvantaged, those communities that Emma talked about, like the Chicago South Side or the West Side, where I actually am from. We cannot have an informed democracy without access to local perspectives. And if we can't at least have equitable reporting, let's begin to have equal reporting. A newspaper or reporters with many voices and many views. We don't need access to a media sitting in judgment. We don't need another elite power center. We need people who know what it is and what it's like to grow up in these neighborhoods and can serve as a pipeline of information that flows freely to the people. With this valuable knowledge and these valuable watchdogs and this valuable reporting, we can hold our government, we can hold our businesses, we can hold our educational and institutions accountable to us. reporters who are of, for, and by the people. So let's be clear as I close. Our founding fathers thought so much of this sacred trust that the very first amendment to the Constitution says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Very first. So yes, we can do this. We can stay united. And let the record reflect that this day we decided that a group of truth-telling, justice-seeking, problem-solving, freedom-loving, sometimes hell-raising, Emma, brothers and sisters came together to work for a press that educates our children and creates healthy communities and protects the middle class and those trying to get into the middle class. We all do better when we all do better. So I have just hopefully answered some of your question of why the press is important, more important than just a newspaper, which I, by the way, Jim, still read every day.
That was so inspiring. Thank you.
You answered my question and restored my faith in humanity all at once. So thank you for that.
My grandfather read 4 newspapers a day, although he did not graduate from high school.
Oh, wow.
But still has 2 strong daily newspapers and multiple news websites. We welcome your help in keeping Chicago a strong news town for the future. Now we'll hear from Lily Reed, Unit Chair of the Baltimore Sun Guild and an education reporter, about the Save Our Sun campaign the Sun Guild started to find a better future for the Baltimore Sun.
So more than a year ago, we in Baltimore learned that the hedge fund Alden Global was courting the parent company of the Baltimore Sun and, of course, the Chicago Tribune. And in the journalism world, this hedge fund was notorious for how they've slashed newsrooms to the bone. I went home that night and cried. It was a really devastating blow. But several of us in the newsroom also knew that we had to do something about it. And we were certain that there were many members of our community who would care very deeply about the paper's fate. We knew they would be disturbed to hear that decisions about coverage of our city were being made most likely in a boardroom outside of our state. And we knew that we could not get anything done without the support of our community. So we agreed that probably our biggest hurdle was just sounding the alarm. Journalists are kind of notorious for not wanting to talk about themselves and what's going on in the industry, but we did feel strongly that we had to put aside that notion and lean into our instinct to inform the community about the situation. So we launched the Save Our Sun campaign in April of 2020. Very quickly, we circulated a petition that garnered, it was more than 6,000 signatures from citizens and prominent Marylanders, all expressing a desire to see the paper saved and returned to local ownership. And that was something we were really clear about in stating our goals. We wanted to see the paper return to local ownership because we believe that a local owner is accountable to its community, and that's really important. And we also knew that we wanted to see the paper turned to a more sustainable business model, specifically as a nonprofit, just like what Jim described in the city of Philadelphia. And thankfully, a Maryland businessman named Stuart Bainum answered that call from journalists and from the communities. He has pledged to do exactly what we've asked for, to purchase the paper and to see it operated under a nonprofit model. And for a time, he was negotiating to buy the paper, but those negotiations appear to have fallen apart because of the hedge fund's greed. So Mr. Bainum didn't let that deter him. He set his sights on purchasing all of the company and the newspapers under it, including the Chicago Tribune. So we want to see all of those papers set on a better track for their communities as well, just like in Baltimore. And news reports say that Mr. Bainum is looking for possible investors, possible partners in Chicago. and we're rooting him on. We really know that he can't do it alone. It's going to take a very vocal community and civic-minded investors stepping forward to protect their watchdog. And time is really of the essence. We need communities to speak out. We need investors to come forward now, because there really is no time to lose. In the short amount of time that the hedge fund has gotten involved in this company, we've seen cuts already to our paper and to our coverage. And we believe that local news is worth saving, and there should be local control of local news.
To put a very fine point on what Lily just said, there is a shareholder vote for Tribune Publishing on May 21st. So when she says time is short, time is truly short. It's a matter of days, a matter of a couple of weeks for Chicagoans to step up to save local news in Chicago.
Save Our Sun campaign has been very inspiring to us in Chicago, and also the other Tribune Publishing guilds around the country have really been inspired by the Save Our Sun campaign.
Okay, this is a question for Lily. Have any similar big benefactors, similar to the Baltimore hotel owner, I think they're referring to Stuart Bainham there, been identified to lend their support to saving the Chicago Tribune from hedge fund vultures?
I'm not in the room talking with investors. I should make that very clear. Us as advocates for our newsroom, we're trying to sound the alarm. We're putting it out there and making it known. Here's what the problem is, which really is like, that's our fundamental job as journalists, is letting people know, hey, there's a problem, and then letting the community decide how to correct it. Allowing lawmakers to step forward, allowing investors to throw money at the problem. So I couldn't say whether or not there have been investors step forward in Chicago, but I do know that there have been some recent media reports to say that Mr. Bainham is looking for those investors. So if there is anybody out there in Chicago who has been thinking about this, maybe following the story for a little bit of time now, the time is now. I mean, this is the moment to step up and really say, not only do I care about this newspaper, but I care about the communities that rely on that coverage. It's so important, because when it goes away, it's that much more difficult to get back. I can't undersell the institutional knowledge that exists in newsrooms that will disappear if those papers get cut to the bone. I mean, every layoff, every furlough, every individual who decides to retire because they just can't take dealing with these owners anymore, that's a loss to those communities. And so I would encourage anybody on this call, or anybody who knows anyone who's got ideas, to step forward now. I really think it's important.
From an investment standpoint, the reason that Alden Global Capital wants to own the Chicago Tribune is because it remains profitable. And this is, for them, a very good business. Their approach to that business is continue to cut and to derive as much profit as they possibly can. Under a nonprofit model, a newspaper can be operated at break even, and it can also avail itself of community support if it centers community in its coverage and in its business model. But this is not a newspaper that is operating in the red, that is hemorrhaging money, as some are. This is a thriving local news operation that can derive continued profits and can support great journalism if it's in the right hands.
I'm going to go ahead and throw this next question to you. This is from a gentleman named John. John wants to know how much of the Philadelphia Inquirer's revenue is coming from 1, subscriptions, 2, advertising, and 3, other non-traditional sources such as donations or grants. And do you feel that that distribution is sustainable over a 5 or a 10-year period?
The sea change in the funding of media, and especially news media, over the past few years has been a growing dependence upon user revenue, subscriptions, print subscriptions, and digital subscriptions, and a decline in advertising. The challenge for the business, both print and digital, has been the advertising declines. So newspapers like the Chicago Tribune, like the Philadelphia Inquirer, for many years were 70, 80% advertising and a small piece of circulation. That's really flipped. So newspapers have to serve their communities, have to serve their readers, have to serve their constituents, or they don't survive. So to answer your question directly, the Philadelphia Inquirer is about 70, 80% subscription and circulation revenue. It's being paid by readers. That's healthy. Another 10, 12% from advertisers, and a very significant piece, we've said publicly, $7 million out of a total of north of $100 million of total revenue. 7 million has come from philanthropy. So in just 4 years, the Inquirer has become the biggest recipient of any American newspaper of philanthropic support from its community. And many, many newspapers are reaching out to donors large and small for that support. So philanthropy is the fastest growing category of newspaper revenue. And it's legitimate revenue. It's not, brother, can you spare a dime? It's, join us in serving our community.
Ricky Gold, thank you for this question. How many Tribune journalists have been laid off to date since Alden appeared? I can answer that one. 56 journalists have left the Tribune newsroom since January 2020. Part of the reason we formed a union a couple of years ago was to put in some protections against layoffs. We're still in contract negotiations, but we do have protections from layoffs in place, and we're working to cement those going forward. But yeah, we're down about 56 journalists since January 2020. Wendy, do you know the answer to that from a Guild standpoint? 3.
I have heard that the Chicago Tribune newsroom, this includes editors and our Guild journalists, is about 150 people.
How important is the role of local news in sorting out the social justice issues that were brought to fore in Chicago by the George Floyd protests? Was news coverage helpful as Chicago dealt with the Laquan McDonald shooting? Could it be better?
Well, my mom always say you can always do better, but let me be clear. The attention that was brought to the George Floyd shooting and the Laquan McDonald shooting was only news because, to a certain extent, not because of the incidents, but because of the activism and the organizing that developed as a result of it. The worldwide movement that was created after the George Floyd shooting literally changed the trajectory of what is social justice. So the newspaper's job on a good day is to report the news and, objectively, so-called objectively, so that people can be informed on how they approach social justice. The newspaper's job is not necessarily to advocate or to activate people. The newspaper's job is to report on the activities that are in the community, that happen in the community. Once they do that, it can galvanize a movement of people that then becomes the news, because when we went in the streets to protest both of these shootings, that became news in and of itself. That's the purpose of an informed citizenry. We only are informed by the news that we get. And let me be clear, we should be cutting reporters. We should be adding reporters. We need more voices in the newsrooms. We need more voices covering all of these communities, not just a particular few, not just the ones who gather downtown. We need to know what's going on, not just in the streets and the carjackings and the shootings of a North Lawndale or a little village, but talk about the vibrancy and the art and the community and all of the things that are going on in the community. If we had that type of reporting, not only would we be better social justice activists, we would be better citizens, because what will happen is we'll say, wow, I did not know that North Lawndale had an arts and cultural fair every year where hundreds and hundreds of people gather of all races to share their culture. That's something that unites us. And more than ever, we need more reporters that unite more people in the city. We'll find out we have more in common than we do apart.
Our final speaker tonight is David Axelrod. He was the chief strategist in President Obama's presidential campaigns. He's a senior political commentator on CNN, host of the podcast The Axe Files, and a former Chicago Tribune reporter. Thank you for being here, David. Take it away.
Wendy, thank you. Yeah, this is really important to me. It's important to me as a person because I grew up in the Chicago Tribune newsroom. Literally, I always say I was educated. I graduated from the University of Chicago, was educated in the Chicago Tribune newsroom. It's important to me as a professional who's been in and around journalism all my life. And it's important to me as a citizen who loves Chicago. When I walked into that Tribune newsroom, June 14th of 1976, I hate to admit, I walked into Tribune Tower, now a condominium, into that ornate 3-story newsroom, and it was one of the most invigorating experiences of my life to step into that newsroom. It was alive with a sense of mission. It was properly staffed. There was a sense that you could do you could do the reporting that needed to be done. You would be backed up by not just the editors and supported by the editors, but by the management of the newspaper, and that the resources necessary to do the work that we needed to do would be available. And I saw journalists shine a bright light into the dark corners of our city, and uncovered corruption, uncovered injustice, and made this a better community. And that is still happening, despite the fact that the Tribune no longer is in Tribune Tower. And by the way, despite the fact that the Sun-Times has now become Trump Tower, the Sun-Times building, there are 2 newspapers here that are trying very hard to do their work, and a lot of great journalists who are doing great work. And the question is, will they be supported? Will that continue? We know what the Alden formula is. They are not there to build and strengthen news organizations. They're there as scavengers to draw down on them. And I just can't imagine that a great city will not have a great newspaper. Chicago has to have that. We know that though we are a great city, there is so much work to be done here. There are so many things that need to be done better, more honestly. There is so much injustice that needs to be addressed, inequity that needs to be addressed. And there are so many things, as was mentioned earlier, that draw us together as one community, which is one of the things that makes Chicago great. All of that is in the province of a great newspaper. And, I want to apologize to everyone who's working at the paper now, because I was so angry when I heard that Alden was about to take over the Tribune, or was scheming to take over the Tribune, that I wrote a very angry tweet about it and wrote RIP at the end. This is, by the way, a good example of why we need good editors, because if I had a good editor, they would have said, do not do that. Do not disparage the really brilliant reporters who are working so hard to do their jobs every day. And I regret having said that, because the point isn't to diminish the reporters who are doing this fine work. The point is to support them and to make sure that they can continue to do that work, and that they have the resources they need to do that work, and the editors they need to make that work better, and the support, the relentless support of management to do that work. I used to revel in, when I was doing political reporting and I was covering City Hall, I knew that management had my back. And if the story was righteous, they were going to stand with me, regardless of the pressures that would come. I don't have any confidence that this crowd would do that. And that would be tragic for the city. So I really wanted to come to join you to tell you how much I am with you. And I've tried in my own conversations to encourage people to intervene here. But I think every model needs to be examined to try and preserve great journalism in the city of the sort that the Tribune has provided for all the years that I've lived here, and many years before that. We will be a lesser community if we allow this to move forward. And I stand ready to do anything that I can. Unfortunately, I did become a newspaper reporter, and I got involved in campaigns and government. So I don't have the ready billions, or I'd buy it myself, because it would be an investment in the future of Chicago. But let's work together to try and find alternatives. And I just want you to know that I stand with you, and I appreciate the work you guys are doing every day, which I read religiously. We need to keep that good work going forward.
Thank you so much, David, for those remarks. And I'm going to speak on behalf of my colleagues that we forgive you for that tweet.
Thank you.
Quick question. You're welcome. Quick question. You work in CNN's newsroom, which is phenomenal, and have also worked in a newspaper newsroom. What do newspapers do that cable news, that TV news don't? Why do communities and cities and the United States need both?
Well, because I think that it's an absolute disaster for democracy if we lose our major local news organizations, because CNN, as good as CNN is, as good as the Times is, as good as the Post is, they are not shining a microscope on every block of our city. They are not covering stories that are important, and certainly important to us as Chicagoans, but may not have as much applicability to a national audience. And they obviously have, they have capacity limits themselves. Every community needs vibrant news organizations to keep elected officials honest, to raise, to write the stories, good and bad, of what's going on in the community, and keep people connected to their community. And so, it is great that we have a flourishing national media. It is terrible that we have news deserts across this country, and that great news organizations have been diminished because of the economics of the news business. And we have to find answers to that, or it's not just the community that's going to suffer, but one by one, our democracy is going to be undermined by that as well.
Thanks for that very inspiring set of comments, David. I'm Jim Friedlich, and I operate as CEO of the Lenfest Institute, which is the nonprofit owner of the Philadelphia Inquirer. We've been working closely with Stuart Bainham on nonprofit models that he wishes to put in place in Baltimore in support of local news. You've got your ear to the ground and are among the best connected Chicagoans one can imagine. What are you hearing from the good and great of Chicago, the foundations, wealthy individuals, business leaders, about this clear and present danger? What are they telling you, and what are the possibilities?
Jim, first of all, thank you for what you do. Philly has always been a great newspaper town. And thank you for keeping that alive in Philadelphia. I think there's great concern. And there were people locally who tried to, in the last couple of years, make a move to head off Alden, and were thwarted, in part by the board itself. I shouldn't say that. Again, that's another reflection of lack of editor, but nonetheless, I think that they were thwarted. I know that there were people who thought about it, about jumping in, and just worried about the economics of it. Not that they wanted to make a big profit, but that they were worried about over time what those finances would look like, and also what they were walking into. I think the Weiss experience has been a little bit concerning to people because he got a look under the hood and walked away. And the sense that that you get is that the picture that was painted before he got a chance to look at those books was not the one that he saw. Now, that may not be right. I see Louisa shaking her head up there. So feel free to correct me. But that you asked me what I hear when my ear's to the ground. That's what I hear. And if it's wrong, it needs to be corrected. There is a real concern. Whether that concern translates into someone stepping up and playing the role that he would have played, I think is an open question. And believe me, I've not only put my ear to the ground, but I've tried to encourage this thinking, and I'm going to continue to do that.
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you again to all of our speakers. We are going to wrap up, but before I let you go, we have a couple of asks, and all of this is going to be included in an email after the session that you'll all get. So don't worry if you miss a couple of details. On May 21st, Alden intends to take Tribune Publishing 100% private by taking on debt to decimate papers like the Tribune and many of our important suburban papers. So you can join our rally on May 15th at the Freedom Center in Chicago. That's where we print the Chicago Tribune and sometimes the New York Times too, by the way. Big brown building on Grand in Chicago. We'll be meeting with community partners and electeds to plan next steps right after that vote. Stay tuned. We'll be having a coalition meeting on May 26th. And sign our letter to foundations. This is important to make sure that the well-intentioned potential investors can see what Chicagoans want and need. And finally, speak up in your own communities. Write to your representatives, raise the alarm. We're going to need their help to achieve our mission for sustainable news in Chicago. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. Thank you again so much to our panelists. I was really moved and invigorated by all of your comments, and just I'm incredibly grateful for your time and your thoughts tonight. Thank you all so much for being here.